$83,000 sounds like safety only if you have never watched the meter run. Most people think poverty begins when the government says it begins. I have spent my life studying numbers, and I can tell you that is one of the most dangerous lies respectable people ever taught themselves. A bad number does not merely mismeasure reality. A bad number becomes a permission slip. It allows institutions to tell a family that they are fine while that family is one transmission failure, one rent increase, or one envelope from the hospital away from panic. I want you to see this clearly in America. The problem is no longer just low income. The problem is that modern life has been turned into a toll road, and the tolls begin long before you feel rich, long before you feel secure, and in many cases long before you have built even an inch of real margin. That is the frame I want you to carry with you through everything I am about to say. A toll road is not a luxury. You do not get to admire it from a distance and decide whether you feel like driving it, if you want to work, raise children, keep a roof over your head, stay insured, and remain a functional participant in the economy. You get on the road. Then the booths begin. One booth takes taxes, one booth takes housing, one booth takes transportation, one booth takes health insurance before a doctor has even looked at you. One booth takes child care so that two adults can earn the money required to pay the other booths. By the time most families have reached the end of that road for the month, they are not deciding between luxury and discipline. They are deciding which anxiety they can postpone. This is why I want you to stop using the wrong ruler. A household earning roughly $83,000 a year is supposed to look stable on paper. That number sounds middle class. It sounds like the kind of income that should buy breathing room. But when you run it through the toll road, it does not buy breathing room, it buys participation. That distinction matters. Participation means you can keep showing up. Freedom means you can absorb a shock. Participation means the machine keeps running. Freedom means the machine can break, and you still sleep at night. Those are not the same life. Take that $83,000 and do what adults are forced to do with real money instead of slogan money. Strip out federal taxes, payroll taxes, state taxes where they apply. And you are down into the mid-60s. That is the pool. Everything must come from there. Now the first booth swings up. Housing, national averages are polite. Real life is not polite. In expensive states and cities, housing is not some modest slice of the budget. It is the dominant claim on the budget. For a renting family in a major metro area, $25,000 to $30,000 a year can disappear into shelter without doing anything extravagant. Call it $28,000. Just like that, your mid-60s become $37,000. The next booth is transportation. And this one is especially brutal because America has spent decades building an economy where work often requires a car and many families functionally need two: fuel insurance, maintenance, registration, financing, another $10,000 gone. Now you are near $27,000. Then comes health care. I am not talking about some catastrophic surgery. I am talking about what it costs to merely stand inside the employer-sponsored system before the body has even had the decency to malfunction. Workers on family coverage can still be contributing thousands a year out of pocket in premiums before deductibles begin their own raid. Put in another $6,800 and you are down around $20,000. Now add child care. Not private school, not a luxury nanny, not some manicured fantasy for the rich. Just the cost of placing children somewhere safe. So two adults can continue earning the money required to stay on the toll road. For two children, a conservative $20,000 can vanish here. Now you are negative before groceries, negative before utilities, negative before a single dollar of saving, negative before replacing tires, fixing the water heater, or buying winter clothes. And this is the number that respectable people want to call stable. That is the first thing I want to tear out of your mind. Too many people hear financial distress and immediately imagine irresponsibility. They picture restaurant meals, impulsive vacations, and stupid gadgets sitting in Amazon boxes by the front door. That fantasy is comforting because it allows observers to keep their moral superiority. It lets them say the family is not trapped, merely undisciplined. I do not like comforting lies. What crushes many households is not discretionary indulgence. It is what I call the participation toll. The participation toll is the baseline price of staying employable, housed, insured, mobile, and compliant in the modern economy. It is not the price of luxury. It is the price of showing up. Once you understand that phrase, half the confusion in modern economic life disappears. You begin to see why a family can be earning more than the official poverty line and still feel one bad month away from humiliation. You begin to see why people who appear respectable on the outside are often living with a nervous system that is never fully unclenched. You begin to see why the phrase middle class has become emotionally confusing. It suggests cushion. In many zip codes, it now means exposure with better furniture. Now let me show you where the bad ruler came from, because once you understand the origin of the number, you stop worshiping it. The official poverty threshold in America was built in the early 1960s around a very simple assumption. Families spent about 1/3 of their income on food, so you priced out a minimal food budget and multiplied it by 3. Food times 3, that became the line. In that world, the logic had some integrity. Housing was manageable relative to income. Health insurance did not function like a second mortgage. College had not yet mutated into a debt engine. Child care was not yet the industrial-sized cost center it would later become, because the structure of households was different. The rest of the budget still fit around the food basket. But old equations age badly when the world beneath them changes. Today, food at home represents a much smaller share of the household budget than it did then, closer to a sliver than a third. Housing, meanwhile, became the giant. Healthcare rose faster than people's dignity. Childcare turned into a second rent payment. Insurance crept upward. Transportation remained compulsory. Home prices pulled away from wages. The shape of the budget changed, but the ruler stayed old. That is how nations begin lying to themselves without ever officially calling it a lie. They keep the old ruler because the old ruler is cheap. They keep the old ruler because a realistic ruler would force expensive admissions. They keep the old ruler because once you admit that the participation toll has risen far beyond the benchmark, then every program linked to that benchmark becomes politically explosive. So instead of fixing the ruler, the system keeps using it. This is not just a statistical error. It is a psychological weapon. When the ruler is wrong, the family thinks the problem might be them. When the ruler is wrong, a worker earning more than double the official poverty threshold can still feel unstable, and then feel ashamed for feeling unstable. When the ruler is wrong, the gap between what the spreadsheet says and what your nervous system feels becomes a private guilt instead of a public design problem. That is one of the cleanest forms of power I know. If you can make people experience a structural squeeze as a personal failure, you do not need to reform anything. They will blame themselves on schedule. I have no interest in that kind of self-deception. So let us say it plainly. If an official line says a family of 4 is above danger at a little over $31,000 a year, while the lived cost of participation keeps hauling ordinary households into the red at incomes vastly above that, the benchmark is not noble. It is obsolete. Some people hear that and panic as if realism itself is dangerous. They think if you say the old ruler is broken, you must be demanding that every problem be solved by wishful thinking or unlimited spending. That is not my argument. I am an investor. I care about cost, incentives, and second-order effects. I care very much about what things really cost. That is precisely why I refuse to use broken math. If food is no longer 1/3 of the budget, then food times 3 no longer describes basic survival in the modern economy. If housing now dominates the household budget, then any serious definition of economic fragility must respect housing. If healthcare, childcare, and transportation are increasingly non-optional, then a measure that pretends they are peripheral is not a measure of reality. It is a museum piece. You cannot allocate capital intelligently with antique assumptions. You cannot build a business on fake unit economics. You cannot build a nation on fake household economics either. Now we move to the part most people do not see until it has already scarred them. A toll road does not only hurt because the tolls are high. It hurts because some tolls jump. This is where the modern welfare state becomes more complicated than either its defenders or its critics like to admit. Much of the assistance system is built around hard thresholds. Fall below a line and help arrives. Rise above it and help disappears. That sounds administratively tidy. In the real world, it produces what I call the trapdoor raise. The trapdoor raise is when nominal income rises but net security falls. A single parent earns a modest wage and receives food support and subsidized child care. Then that parent gets a raise on paper. Progress in practice, a threshold is crossed, and one benefit disappears, resources drop. A little more money went in, a lot more support came out. The raise was not a ladder, it was a trapdoor, then it happens again. A little more wage growth, another eligibility line crossed, and child care support vanishes. Then again, public health coverage disappears, and now private premiums, deductibles, and out. Out-of-pocket costs march in like a second army at multiple points. Earning more can leave you with less usable room than before. That is not laziness. That is a discontinuity built into the road. I want you to understand the emotional damage of that. When a system repeatedly teaches people that incremental effort can trigger incremental punishment, it does not simply reduce disposable income. It corrodes trust. It teaches caution where ambition should be. It teaches households to fear crossing lines. It teaches parents that a raise can be dangerous. It teaches workers that the path from dependence to independence is not a staircase, but a series of missing floorboards. That damage does not show up neatly in GDP. It shows up in smaller risks taken, businesses not started, moves not made, children postponed, negotiations avoided, ambition converted into risk management. This is why the middle of the income distribution can look acceptable from a distance and feel strangled up close. The system offers help at the bottom, then yanks it away before market prices become survivable. That gap between where help ends and where genuine stability begins is one of the most underappreciated stress zones in America. People in that zone are often invisible in the public conversation. They are not counted as officially poor. They do not qualify as affluent. They are simply exposed. They live in what I call the benchmark gap. The benchmark gap is the stretch of economic terrain where the state says you are fine, the market says pay full price, and your household says one problem at a time, please. There are millions of families living in that gap. They do not need a lecture on self-esteem. They need honest arithmetic. Now let me show you something fascinating. Because every now and then reality runs an experiment for us during the pandemic. Many of the daily tolls briefly disappeared. Commuting stopped for many people. Child care arrangements shifted. Gasoline purchases fell. Work clothes, lunches out, dry cleaning, and the endless friction costs of physically showing up dropped away. At the same time, the personal savings rate surged dramatically. Yes, stimulus mattered. Of course it did. But another lesson hid inside that episode, and it was one of the clearest economic x-rays we have had in decades. When the participation toll falls, households that looked irresponsible on paper can suddenly look prudent. Read that sentence again. The same family, the same income, the same character, the same discipline, the same brain, and yet the savings behavior changes dramatically when the road charges less just to exist inside it. That should tell you something very important. A large share of financial fragility is not produced by recklessness. It is produced by the recurring tolls attached to ordinary participation. Then the economy reopened, and the tolls came back, many of them higher. Mortgage financing costs jumped sharply after the ultra-low rate period ended. Insurance kept climbing, health costs kept swelling, housing remained absurdly expensive in many places. Suddenly, the same household that had briefly tasted oxygen was back underwater. That is what I mean when I tell you that a bad system can feel like a personal defect. The family experiences the squeeze as private failure, but the squeeze itself is mechanical. And here is the part that should bother any serious capitalist. When the cost of a stable life rises faster than the measures used to judge distress, people do not merely feel poorer. They behave more cautiously in ways that reduce dynamism itself. They delay buying homes. They delay having children. They avoid starting companies because losing employer-tied benefits would be catastrophic. They avoid moving to higher opportunity cities because rent devours the upside. They remain attached to jobs they dislike because health insurance is stapled to the desk. That is not a thriving ownership society. That is a risk. Averse labor force paying admission into a system that keeps widening the moat around stability. And because the official numbers lag lived reality, the public conversation becomes polluted. On paper, more households move into higher nominal income brackets. On paper, that looks like progress. But if the price of a merely stable life has risen faster than those households' purchasing power, then what you are watching is not upward mobility. It is threshold drift. The category changed. The security did not. I have spent decades watching the difference between nominal progress and real progress. Nominal progress is when the number on the paycheck rises. Real progress is when your dependency falls. Nominal progress is when you earn more. Real progress is when one expense does not have the power to terrify you. Nominal progress is salary. Real progress is margin. Most people chase the first and wonder why the second never arrives. Now let me turn the lens back on you, because this is where my voice usually becomes less comfortable for people. You are not the Federal Reserve. You are not Congress. You are not going to redesign the welfare state by the weekend. So the question becomes, how do you live intelligently on a toll road built by people who still use an outdated map? This is where strategy begins. The first mistake is to keep using the broken ruler in your own head. If you earn above some official line and still feel pressure, do not rush to conclude that you are weak, spoiled, or simply bad with money. First, separate structural pressure from personal leakage. If you confuse those two, you will either excuse stupidity or internalize injustice. Both errors are expensive. You must learn to run two ledgers. The first ledger is the participation toll. The second ledger is the leakage ledger. The participation toll contains the costs you pay to remain functional inside the economy. Housing, transportation, basic insurance, minimum child care, required to work, essential taxes, utilities, baseline food. The leakage ledger contains everything that makes the squeeze worse than it needs to be. Status spending, subscription creep, bad debt, impulse, convenience, housing choices made for ego rather than resilience. Vehicles purchased to impress people who would not pay your deductible. Lifestyle baselines silently upgraded every time income rises. These ledgers are not the same. Serious adults learn to distinguish them. If you do not, you can spend 10 years fighting the wrong enemy. A family on $83,000 in a high-cost region may not be able to latte its way into freedom. But that same family can absolutely destroy whatever margin it does have by confusing image with stability. The goal is not to pretend the road is fair. The goal is to stop volunteering for tolls that do not belong on your route. That means smaller fixed commitments. That means more skepticism toward any monthly payment that feels manageable but compounds into dependency. That means treating your housing decision as a strategic decision, not an identity announcement. That means seeing the second car, the trendy neighborhood, the private school arms race, and the prestige subscription stack for what they often are. Private toll booths you built with your own hands. You cannot always reduce the participation toll. You can often reduce self-imposed tolls. That matters. The second strategic principle is this: build refusal power. Refusal power is the ability to say no without your whole life falling apart. If you want to know whether someone is financially free, do not ask how much they earn. Ask how many months of friction they can absorb without begging a bank, a boss, or a bureaucratic threshold for permission. Refusal power begins with liquid cash, not theoretical wealth, not a house that would take 6 months to sell, not retirement money locked behind penalties cash. Enough cash that a car repair is not a family crisis. Enough cash that a medical bill does not send you to a card with a predatory interest rate. Enough cash that a layoff becomes a planning problem instead of a panic attack. I call this your shock absorber fund. The first job of money is not to impress anyone. The first job of money is to absorb shock. A household without shock absorbers lives every month, one pothole away from losing control of the wheel. The third principle is to reduce forced dependency wherever possible. On a toll road, dependency is expensive because every lost option raises the power of every booth. If your job also controls your health insurance, then the job is worth more than the wage and more dangerous to lose than the wage implies. If your rent takes such a large share of income that moving for opportunity is impossible, then your housing cost is not merely high, it is strategically crippling. If childcare costs require 2 full incomes, but the loss of one income does not reduce the childcare bill fast enough, then your household structure is carrying hidden fragility. Once you begin thinking this way, you stop asking only, can I afford this now? You begin asking, what does this commit me to later? That is a far richer question. I have gotten wealthy by thinking in commitments, not just purchases. A purchase is a moment. A commitment is a corridor. People get trapped because they price moments and ignore corridors. Now let me say something even sharper. For many households, the real economic dream is no longer abundance. It is simply elasticity. Elasticity means you can bend without breaking. Elasticity means a temporary shock does not become permanent damage. Elasticity means a raise improves your life instead of disappearing into a new mandatory cost. Elasticity means your budget has places to flex. That is why I dislike the glamour language so common in personal finance. Too many people are taught to think in terms of luxury, aspiration, and visible wins. I prefer to think in terms of load-bearing capacity. Can your system bear weight? Can your budget bear surprise? Can your career bear transition? Can your family bear one bad year? If the answer is no, then the conversation is not really about wealth yet. It is about engineering. And engineering starts with honesty. Maybe you live in a city where median life already demands too much of median income. Maybe you are in a household structure that looks normal but has no shock tolerance at all. Maybe you are above the official distress line and still economically fragile, say it. Name it. There is power in refusing the benchmark lie. The benchmark lie says that because a ruler drawn generations ago has not labeled you poor, you must be safe. Number safety is not what an old chart says. Safety is what your household can survive. Now let me go one level deeper because I do not want you to leave with only criticism. I want you to leave with a test. Here is the test. Could your household survive 6 months of one major friction event without borrowing at stupid rates, liquidating long-term assets, or imploding emotionally? If the answer is no, then whatever your income is, your first mission is not status. It is resilience. Could one parent lose a job and still preserve dignity while you recalibrated? If the answer is no, then you are not yet as stable as your lifestyle may suggest. Could you absorb a rent increase, health deductible, car repair, or temporary care disruption without your whole month turning into triage? If the answer is no, then your participation toll is too close to your total income and your strategy must change. This is where many viewers want me to deliver soft reassurance. I am not going to do that. I am not interested in telling you everything will work out because you are trying your best. Trying your best without changing structure is how people spend 15 years on the same road, paying higher tolls with prettier clothes. I want you to make harder moves than that. Cut the cost that locks you in, renegotiate the commitment that removed your margin, leave the zip code that consumes your future if the numbers truly never work. Treat each new fixed expense like an employee you are about to hire. Ask what it will produce. Ask what it will cost in bad months, not good months. Ask whether it widens or narrows your corridor of freedom. And above all, stop mistaking participation for prosperity. That may be the most expensive mistake in the modern middle class. Participation is not prosperity. A household that can pay every bill in a calm month but cannot absorb one jagged month is not prosperous. It is synchronized with the road. A household that has respectable income, impressive appliances, finance cars, and no real optionality is not affluent. It is decorated exposure. A household that can say no, absorb shocks, move when necessary, and keep investing through interruptions is closer to freedom, even if it appears less glamorous from the street. I know which household I would rather own. That word matters too. Own the worker mindset asks, how do I keep up with the toll road? The owner mindset asks, how do I keep the toll road from owning me? That is the entire game. The old poverty line cannot answer that question for you. Median income cannot answer it for you. Politicians cannot answer it for you. Only your structure can answer it. Only your margin can answer it. Only your willingness to reject expensive illusions can answer it. Now let me close this in the bluntest way I know. You can spend your life obeying the old ruler, telling yourself you must be okay because your income is above some official threshold, while your nerves, your marriage, your savings, and your choices all scream the opposite. Or you can accept that the road changed, the tolls changed, the map lied, and the only intelligent response is to build a household that is harder to shake than the system expects. That is your choice. You can remain a well-dressed passenger on a road that charges you for the privilege of staying anxious, or you can begin deliberately and maybe painfully to build refusal power shock absorbers and a life whose stability is measured not by an old government number, but by how much reality it can survive. One path gives you a respectable story. The other gives you a fighting chance at freedom. Choose the ruler, then choose the road.